on May the 4th, but we didn't approve the funding for it, so it's something about it being unprofessional. Anyways, so I've been working as a cybersecurity engineer for quite a few years now. I've dealt with a couple different tools like ArcSight, Elastic, and most recently I've been working with Splunk. It's been my favorite. I do work for Freedom Consulting Group. I'm not a Splunk sales engineer, although it's going to seem like it after you guys hear my presentation. And yeah, so the agenda that we're going to go over today has to do with the auditing requirements that we have today, how they're changing. Something that's coming down the pipe, we've seen the OMB mandate that came out in 2021. The intelligence community is coming out with their own standards, and we're expecting to see the total data ingest rates we have to accompany for to go up from anywhere from 3 to 5 times what we're currently ingesting. So an enterprise agency that currently has 30 terabytes of data a day could be seeing upwards of 150 terabytes a day. To do that, you need to make sure that we have a scalable SIEM solution in place. And Splunk fits the bill for that. There are a couple different management servers that they use to handle this. There's the deployment server, which manages the universal order relationship, which is the client that gets installed on all of the endpoint devices. There is the cluster manager to the indexer cluster relationship, and that's where all the data is sent to and stored. And then there is the search head deployer to search head cluster relationship. And the search heads are where the users log in to view all of their data for their compliance tasks. After that, I'm going to show a quick slide on one of my favorite tools that I've seen implemented through Splunk, which is called QAudit. And what it is great for is creating a single pane of glass for your ISOs and ISIs to log in and complete their ICS 500-27 enterprise audit requirements. The very last slide that I'm going to show is just a couple of links that Splunk has for free training that anyone can take. So we mentioned the changing auditing requirements. Some that you're probably familiar with today would be the ISO 27001 internal audit requirements. And if you work in the intelligence community, you know of the ICS 500-27. We mentioned the OMB mandate that got put out back in 2021. The intelligence community has to do their own thing with any standards that come out. So right now, it's not finalized, but they're being drafted. We have the NNS audited requirements. We don't know for sure what's going to be coming out of them, but we imagine they're going to be based a lot off of the OMB standards. And whenever I look over that, a couple of them that really stick out to me are going to be LDAP logs. So increased LDAP logging on all of your privileged users' actions, DHCP logs to monitor these reservations more, DNS logs for passive monitoring of connections, performance monitoring logs. I don't know if anyone's ever had to deal with Windows Percom, but the amount of data that generates is insane. And then the biggest thing that we're going to see is an increase in application level monitoring, which is going to be a huge challenge, especially with all the government and house-based software that we have. So you can tell with all of these increased loggings that we're going to have that the amount is expanding. So you need to make sure that the infrastructure that you have in place can explode with it. Splunk specializes in that with its horizontal scaling. So one of the biggest problems that I have had with past products is customer engagement for any auditing that we have to do. And one thing we like to do with Splunk is make that as easy as possible on the customer to get the client on their device so they can send logs to us. We do this through various scripts, and Splunk itself just allows for a untar into the directory that you need, and it's up and running. The only thing the user has to do at that point is point to the deployment server, and it will pull down all of the configs that they need at a user level to tell their systems which logs to send. One thing we also like to have the customers do is to implement a unique identifier, so like a project ID, where as they want to add more systems into their environment, they just associate their project ID number to it, And they don't have to engage with the engineering team at all. They just put that project ID associated to their device, and now it's reporting in the Splunk, just like all the rest of them. One thing that Splunk's really good with that is it has a no questions asked ingest. So it doesn't matter the data source that is sending. Splunk will receive it. And as long as it's sending through the universal forwarder, it will try to put some type of generic tag into it. So IP address, name, etc. Where whenever it receives, you can still do something with the logs until you put in a custom parsing replacement. And I think the best part about the deployment server is it's pretty low maintenance. I've seen one run over 30,000 clients reporting to it, and it's a single server instance. I recommend putting a second one in place just so you make sure that you have redundancy in case it goes down, but it's a small footprint. Over here, I have a diagram that kind of explains how it works. The deployment server communicates with the customer's devices over port 8089. The customer devices actually implement the connection to the deployment server and then pull down the apps that they need. You can see how it works together over here from start to finish. You have your deployment server here. It tells the universal forwarders where to send their data and what data to send, which then gets ingested into the indexing tier and then can be searchable from the search head tier. So after the data is ingested, we get into the cluster manager and the indexing cluster. The initial sizing for your indexing cluster is going to depend on a number of different factors, such as the amount of users that you have. If you're doing a data model acceleration for specific data that you want to access frequently and quickly. The amount of data ingest that you have and users. To scale your existing cluster that you may have in place, it can be done in one of two ways. You can either hit it reactively or proactively. Proactively is the best case scenario, and that's, say, at the end of the week, you notice that your total ingest per day has went up roughly 300 gigabytes. If you look at a Splunk scaling model for a minimum spec indexer, you may know on Monday you want to build 2 more indexers to facilitate this new data ingest. By doing this, the customers don't notice any changes. They don't notice any slowdowns in the data. All their stuff is just as it was the week before. You just have 2 extra servers handling everything at this point. Typically, though, you end up in a reactive situation, and that may be because of a slow procurement team or unable to get the funding whenever you would want it. And what you might experience then is your data ingest goes up at 300 gigabytes per day, and your indexing cluster starts to slow down on bringing data in, or your customers are experiencing slow searches because it's trying to retrieve data from an overworked indexing cluster. At that point, they put in a ticket noting that they have some degradation in the infrastructure, and all of a sudden management finds money to purchase a new server too. The cluster manager works a lot like the deployment server, whereas anytime you stand up a new server, all you have to do is untar the Splunk directory into its location and point it to the manager node. From there, the manager node will pull down all of the different configurations and apps that the indexing cluster needs to have to work in synchronism with the rest of the environment. And it can be done in a matter of minutes. After that new indexer comes online, Splunk will then try to rebalance the data across the cluster, which can happen automatically, although I would recommend to do it outside of business hours. That way you don't have any search performance on your customer base. So how do the customers know that there is a new indexer set up to send to them? That's done with the universal forward. So what you have them deploy at the very beginning, it is actually looking at the cluster manager. And this works in a way that it tells the universal forwarders what indexers are available to send to, and it also load balances the data. So not only does it know what indexers are available to send to, but it knows their current load and utilization. This is commonly coupled with a use acknowledgement setting, which says if this indexer is down and it cannot send to it, it will keep retrying the cluster until it finds something that it can send to. So it works as a way to ensure that you don't have any data losses. And then we have the search head deployer to search head cluster relationship. This one gets a little funny, but there are a couple things to know specifically. To have a search head cluster, you have to have 3 search heads. And they use that so they can do the raft consensus to elect a captain. Now, the management of your search head cluster is shared between the deployer and the captain. The deployer handles all of the configurations. So similar to the manager in the universal forward, it pushes down settings such as various timeouts that you might want, or maybe pushing out a license file to your search heads. The captain does most of the work in this cluster. And what it does is it replicates your content across. So say a user logs in to Splunk and they create a custom dashboard on search head cluster number 1. They go home for the day, they log in the next day, they hit search head cluster number 2. That dashboard is now going to be replicated there, and it's going to be a seamless experience for the customer. The other thing the search head captain does is it works to balance the load between the search head cluster. So if you have Sergeant Snuffy logged into search head cluster number 1, and he's ran 18 different searches over a 4-month period of time, and it's tying up all the resources, the search head captain will recognize this and try to dispatch some of the other jobs to the other members of the cluster. And knowing when to scale your search head cluster can be done in a couple different ways. One thing to note with the search head cluster is each search ties up a single virtual CPU until the search completes. So whether that search takes 2 seconds or 2 minutes, it is tied up one of those CPUs for that time. You can increase the number of CPUs on your search head cluster members from 24 to 48. Say you're using Amazon, just increase the instance type. Or you can add another search head cluster member. The diminishing returns on increasing an instance size are very minimal. So it's up to the organization on how they want to handle it. If they want an additional search head member for the availability, they can, or they can just increase the cost of a single instance. And here we have an example of something that Splunk can do. This is a premium app created by Cumulus, and they call it QAudit. What this is a single pane of glass dashboard. They use data model acceleration to make this data quickly retrievable, and it allows for your ISOs to log in and do their continuous monitoring requirement checks with a single dashboard. They can take a screenshot, submit it as their body of evidence, and it has the majority of the data that they need, saving hours off of their workload per week. Something also to note about this, even though it is a premium app that is sold by Cumulus, there's nothing special in here that a Splunk engineer with enough experience couldn't create on their own. Because all this is a dashboard with multiple panels running different searches. And the last slide that I have here is for the different training references that Splunk has. They have a whole YouTube series for Splunk how-tos, which can cover different searching techniques that you can utilize. The Splunk docs page is incredible. As an engineer, anytime I run into issues, there has been an article out there, and it's easy to find. They don't lock it behind some paywall vendor account like some other companies may do. It is publicly available for everyone to go look at today. And as of the time that this presentation was written, there were 42 free courses available in their Splunk training website that anyone can take today. With that, I open the floor to any questions. And I wish everyone a good day.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris, coming all the way from Virginia to give us that awesome brief on STEM. So I've got a little bit of a treat for you. This is something that we've become known for over the last couple of years. One of the things I really like about our company, on top of getting to work in the ecosystem of St. Louis and innovation, is we love to take on special projects. And especially if it can have an impact. And this special project that we're about ready to present is on a little thing we call Operation Recovery. And I'll let Chris kind of get into it, but at the end of the day, you know, if you all remember, we evacuated Afghanistan pretty abruptly. And as a result of that, 20 years of fighting, you make some friends on the ground. People make sacrifices. Their families got liberties that they never had before. And when we walked away, there was a lot left behind. And it was imperative on a lot of different people to come together to build something, some kind of bridge out of Afghanistan to save these people that had given so much of their lives over the last 20 years. So we got to play a small part in that. And I'm really privileged to introduce to you a good friend of mine, which, you know, it's hard to say that, right? I run a company, but I love to have people like Chris on my team. You know, Chris and I grew up together, neighbors. You know, he went through the skateboarding thing. He's still a big skateboarder. I didn't. I was a basketball player, but you know, all in all, our dads only tried to fight each other one time, and we're still friends to this day. And so I'm happy to introduce Chris DeWeese, who's in charge of all of my commercial portfolio. He's a former software developer, reformed. We took away his rights so he could help manage and lead my commercial services division. And one of the things he did was help me deliver this amazing project. So over to you, Chris.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Dick said, I'm here to actually talk about one of the most impactful projects that we've been able to do in my time at Uncommon and probably most of my career. So as Dick said, I think, you know, a lot of us saw August of 2021 as the Taliban started to take back large parts of Afghanistan and including getting back into the capital. We started a pretty hasty evacuation. There was multiple crises coming out of that. Just a general humanitarian crisis. A lot of people who just wanted to leave. They didn't like the Taliban. And then you also had all of our allies that had been helping us side by side for 20 years. We have a lot of veterans, a good amount of veterans at Uncommon. I've had several that still have interpreters and people that are trying to flee Afghanistan. So in the fall of 2021, Amazon came to us looking for a partner. They have a secure communications product called AWS Wickard. It's an end-to-end communications tool, and they were trying to help Operation Recovery solve a pretty major problem they had. Operation Recovery is one of several nonprofit groups that were stood up, staffed by volunteers, former, current military folks. They were really trying to get their friends who they'd served alongside in Afghanistan out safely. And to do this, it required them to collect all kinds of data. They had to identify everyone they were trying to get out. If you guys have heard about the State Department has their special immigrant visa program. So integrating with all of that, ensuring that we had, the right person, they are who they say they are. They had some massive problems trying to get the right folks out. And they had an even bigger problem in that the Taliban were taking over all of the infrastructure that Afghanistan had built up during our time there. And if you guys understand anything about, critical communications infrastructure, if you control it, you basically have the keys, and you can block, you can snoop, you can do what you want. And the Taliban absolutely had nation state actors that were glad to help them do this. And so one of the cruxes of the solution is that there's a lot of email being used back and forth between the different nonprofits, between the folks on the ground in Afghanistan, the case management systems. And so we were approached by Amazon to help them bridge that gap and help them integrate the Wicker platform, which allows the end-to-end secure communication. I'm sure you guys have heard about apps like Signal, Threema, and those ones that really try to dig in and be more secure. Hopefully not everyone relies on WhatsApp. It's been terribly insecure, and it was actually one of the apps where things were getting intercepted. And so what we were asked to deliver, I actually have several guys in the audience that helped with the original solution, was an integration between the case management system, which is a system called Apricot Social Solutions, Wicker, and then ultimately to the devices at both what they call their shepherds, which are the folks who are helping move folks around, and then the heads of household or the families that we're working to evacuate. And so throughout this process, we really had to focus in on closing those gaps. We had to make sure that there weren't any communications that were going to be generated on any side of this, coming out of the clear. And so great partnership with Amazon. They've been a huge partner to us in our work here locally at Sky Air Force Base and other places. And they gave us direct access to the Wicker product team and an inside track to get all the things, all the questions answered. So the solution is comprised of several pieces. It has an email integration with the Apricot solution that allows us to take the emails that would be sent from that system and convert them into a secure message via the Wicker platform. And then it'll get routed to the correct user based on their Wicker ID. And there's also a pretty robust bot system within Wicker. As you guys can imagine, I mean, there's a huge time zone difference between in the United States, Afghanistan. There's folks doing, 24/7, there's things happening. And so having just basic things like a chat bot that can auto respond to just the basic questions that the Afghans have, what's their visa status? How do I get in contact with someone in emergency, kind of FAQ style stuff. So we're able to implement that in a bot that can respond, any time of day if they have these basic questions. And then on the other side of that, the operation recovery staff are able to use some features within Apricot to send out targeted, more mass messages. In fact, in a recent conference call we were having with them, they were walking us through some of the more new developments. The Afghan commandos who were trained alongside our U.S. Special Forces are being specifically targeted. There's a large nation state that's helping with that. Take a pic, you probably can see who it is. And they are working round the clock right now to make sure that those commandos and their families are getting updated info down to the district in the various cities and areas of Afghanistan where they're hiding, to let them know to either seek shelter and get out of that district. So there's a lot of parts to this. There's a lot of communications that need to be secured. They're actively being monitored. And the latest turn of events that we also found out about, the Taliban is starting to force registration of all phones using IDs and other information so that they know who has the devices. So we now have a situation where we physically, volunteers with Operation Recovery need to be able to get devices to people in an anonymous way so that they can again stay out of the hands of the Taliban. So it's still a very serious ongoing situation. And it's one that our team's been very proud to help with. So going into this year, we have a team of now 10 volunteers from Uncommon, and we have a new round of scope and kind of the next evolution of the solution that we're going to working on as we continue to evolve this and support those changing requirements. So I'd like to now, if technology will allow me, play you guys a video that was produced by Amazon that talks about this project. So we'll see if we've conquered the audio here.
After Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, a nonprofit called Operation Recovery made it their mission to safely evacuate at-risk Afghan citizens. The list of people needing help quickly grew into the thousands as individuals who worked as translators, journalists, activists, and educators faced increasing threat of retaliation. When Operation Recovery started to coordinate with evacuees, they realized secure communication was needed to prevent any chance of Taliban interference. So they looked to AWS Wickr for help. Wickr is an end-to-end encrypted service that enables the exchange of messages and files, which only the senders and recipients can see. Once a message is sent, Wickr generates a unique encryption key, which scrambles up the message. And when it reaches the receiving device, it's put back together again. Each Wickr message or file has its own unique key. Users also have the option to self-destruct messages, which means the communication can never be recovered. AWS Wickr and consulting firm Uncommon developed a solution that integrated Operation Recovery's existing case management system and provided end-to-end encrypted communication 24/7. The nonprofit has used this Wickr solution to coordinate the evacuation of nearly 4,000 at-risk Afghan citizens. And that number will continue to rise as Operation Recovery carries out their mission to help as many people as possible find safety.
All right. So, with that, like I said, this has been one that's Uncommon's been very proud to be a part of. It's an ongoing mission that we're going to continue to support. And we look forward to working more with our friends at Operation Recovery, as well as our partners in AWS Wickr. So probably got a minute or two for questions, if anybody has any. Otherwise, we'll keep the show going. Mr. Kent.
Great job. Just out of curiosity, do you know how many people or families, just a data point, have taken advantage of this system? And it's actually, they've gone through whatever the process are. Just curious, how big is it?
So as of one of the things I didn't mention is we're also doing a lot of data work for Operation Recovery. In fact, we just made a pass again doing some deduplication, because what happens often is when a family doesn't get a response, the head of household who's applying, they'll just keep submitting applications into that case management system. So we've used a few algorithms to help pick and pull and dedupe that. Last update we had is heads of household, which is kind of what they measure by, is 25, about 2,500 people total. I think there's probably close to about 8,000 or 9,000 in their database once you start adding in family members and extended family. Because often it's not just like the parents and the children, it's it's entire families, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters. They had one of the challenges we've had is getting the Wickr IDs and everything set up. It takes time. There's human handoffs that have to happen so they can get these set up more securely. They probably had somewhere between like 50 to 60% coverage of the Wickr IDs, but we're still going through and vetting if some of those are correct. They do a lot of stuff in I'm just blanked on the language, the primary language there in Afghanistan. Pashto. Yep. And so they have both English and the Pashto, so they're trying to reach as many people as they can, but there's still just some barriers because a lot of these end users are not super technically savvy, so they just need some help.
8,000 to 10,000 probably people have been saved by this or help.
Potentially will be, yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
there's still that 2,500 at a household figure is the number we're still tracking that are not out. So there's a significant amount of people that are still in need of help, either within Afghanistan or neighboring countries. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, and I enjoyed sharing this with you all.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. You know, a couple other things that are worthy of noting with Afghanistan is they still haven't been designated as a refugee status by the UN. And when you don't designate the humanitarian crisis, you don't get funding, you don't get help, you don't get international support. And so to this day, they still have not really designated Afghanistan as a refugee situation. Conversely, as we all follow in the news, Ukraine was essentially named a refugee situation within minutes of Russia's attack. And so we have a lot of funding and a lot of support. Obviously, we want to support the Ukrainian community, but we don't want to leave the Afghanistan community behind. And through our work with World Affairs Council, I've actually become familiar with, we actually have a lot of immigrant families from Afghanistan moving into St. Louis. And one of the most incredible statistics of about those folks is typically, I mean, I can't even wrap my head around this. They're coming over here and within 30 days assimilating, they're getting a job, their kids are going into school, they're getting into a house. That's how fast it happens. And they're making an impact. They're working hard, they're skilled, they're great people, great history. And I'm really proud that St. Louis, kind of in the aftermath of the evacuation, stepped up and said, hey, we're willing to take immigrants. We're willing to bring these people here and you know, bring them into our community. And so it's a great thing for St. Louis. 4,000 people evacuated. That's crazy. So we're really proud of that, as Chris said, and just excited that the opportunity to support them. So up next, keeping with my theme of flying people around, I've got my friend Heather Young, who is going to talk a little bit about IoT security. You know, if you think about, at least for me being a cyber guy, what is the earliest big hack that you guys remember happening maybe in the last 25 years? Any ideas? Does Target ring a bell? Remember when Target got hit? I think that was the day I realized as a software developer that I could really screw up and have a profound impact on the profitability of the company. And so Target got hit, I think it's almost 20 years now, been roughly 20 years. And the way they got hit was they actually got hacked through their HVAC system. Okay, they didn't do a direct attack on Target. Target was a big company, they had a lot of people working security. So what they said was, you know what? Target subcontracts out the management of their HVAC systems nationally to another firm. And they could maybe not have the sophistication required to protect Target. And turns out they didn't. And they backdoored and stole millions of people's information in the biggest hack at the time for this country. And that really kind of set the ball rolling for hack after hack after hack. Well, the cool thing is we have not figured out how to fix that yet. It's been 20 years and we're still fighting it. But my friends here from Clarity actually have an awesome solution. And they're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing today. You know, what are those threats? People are crawling through the HVAC systems, vending machines. They're collecting your credit card information. It's incredible what they can do. Clarity's got some great solutions. So I'm going to hand it over to Heather, who is the VP of DoD and SLED business development for Clarity. If you know anything about SLED, that does not match with DoD. So she's got an incredibly hard job. She's an incredibly smart person. So thank you so much, Heather, for coming and joining us.
Thanks, Nick. Well, we're really excited to be here. The partnership we have with the Uncommon has been amazing so far. It's developed fast. And so Mackenzie and I are going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing here regionally, but we're also going to talk a little bit about, you know, what does this mean for us as a country? And so I think one of the things that I'd like to bring up, it's so funny that he mentions Target because I've been in cybersecurity for just over a decade and in software for almost 20 years. And I was one of the vendors who was protecting Target when that hack happened. And so it was really jarring for us to see how that all evolved. I was a STEM vendor back then. And that was the first time that I think that anybody realized that you can lay down all of these different tools. You can try to have a defense in depth program, but if you don't look at everything that is connecting into those environments, you actually don't have a zero trust. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Mackenzie is our state and local rep. He is on the West Coast. We have another rep who's on the East Coast. And then, of course, we have federal practice as well as Department of Defense. So we're going to walk you through what does it mean? What's the Internet of Things? And I think the most important thing I want you to get out of this is that this type of security is a life and death type of security. We've already had ransomware attacks on hospitals where we've had individuals who've died because those pumps, infusion pumps, were hacked, basically frozen up because of ransomware. We've already had adversaries that have hacked into water plants and tried to change chemical levels to poison our cities. So this is a life and death topic. So we take it very seriously, and we're very proud of that we're doing, not just as Clarity, but as a community. And so we'd love to have you come on our journey with us.
Yeah, and to clarify, see what I did there. We're not just for the public sector. We also have a commercial practice as well. It's just the public sector folks who are here in front of you today. Did anyone see in the news last night about Dallas? No, Dallas. It's relative to me because I cover everything west of the Mississippi. But because of ransomware right now, the Dallas Police Department is entirely shut down. They are not able to dispatch officers. And so, as Heather had mentioned, it's really important that we start thinking of things beyond the world of IT when we start considering some of these attack vectors. So who here in the room has an Alexa in their home or an Echo? I don't know if they're the same thing. I don't like the smartest thing in my home is like a clap on, clap off. All right, who here drove to get here today? Just about everybody. Okay, and did anyone take the steps to get to the 5th floor? No, none of y'all. Okay, well, when you have a connected home, when you are going through traffic lights where there's a security camera attached to that city's network, when you take an elevator to get to the 5th floor, these are all devices that 10 years ago, 5 years ago, were not connected to the internet. And now, because they are, that represents an opportunity for a malicious actor to start breaking into your network. And so when we talk about the extended Internet of Things, it's kind of a really broad topic. I didn't even know what IoT was, and I've been in tech my entire career until about 3 years ago when I made the transition at Cisco to be part of Cisco's IoT portfolio. But different strokes for different folks. It's defined by different people in different ways. And so when we start talking about, the modern industrial network or the extended Internet of Things, there are about 5 separate verticals that we really start to consider as this XIoT space. The first is going to be your OT, your operational technology environment. It's kind of our bread and butter here at Clarity. So those are your SCADA networks, PLCs, HMIs, basically the computers that power your conveyor belts or your robotic arms. So if you think about oil and gas facilities, manufacturing, water and utilities, things of that nature. We also have IoT devices. So those are going to be your security cameras, your access control systems, any sort of sensors that you might have in your environment as well also fall into this category. We also have building management systems. So smart buildings, a lot of green initiatives rely on connection to the internet. And then finally, IT devices, as well as Heather had mentioned, IoMT devices. So Internet of Medical Things. That's how we get there. And so with the growth of these devices, I mean, if you look at this graph here, you see about this purple line right here, that's stagnant growth. Those are your traditional devices and how they're not moving year over year. These black bars represents your XIoT space. We're seeing about a 7% uplift year over year, according to Gartner. And so with a boom of these devices that historically weren't connected to the internet that now are, there are a couple of new challenges that you have to start considering when you really want to drill down and have a cyber secure posture. First and foremost, more devices, more surface area, more opportunity for attacks. I think especially in the space that Heather and I aligned to, I mean, we all saw how fragile the supply chain it was, right? And so with the advent of COVID and with the sort of new magnifying glass on just the interconnectivity of these devices, malicious actors recognize that that's a really fragile chain that represents an opportunity for them to cause some pretty serious breakdowns in things that we had taken for granted. I mean, who'd have thunk it 4 years ago that toilet paper would ever be, in a shortage. Additionally, more devices means less visibility. So if you think of these devices, each of them speaks their own unique language. And as you can imagine, when you start having more languages in a space, it becomes more difficult to understand what each of those devices is trying to accomplish and how they communicate to one another. More attacks and more severe. And also we're seeing a gap between the folks who live on the information technology side of things, as well as the folks who live in our space, the OT, the IoT space. And so I like to joke around that when I have these conversations with customers, they go one of three ways. I either talk to the folks on the operational technology side of the house, and all they care about is keeping the lights on, right? I mean, we're talking about things that are automated. And so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So as long as they're able to say at the end of the day that their computer processes are working fine, they're going to be happy. You also have IT folks, and their goal is to make sure that they don't wind up in the news for being responsible for a hack or something like that. And the best conversations are when we have IT and OT, because typically those groups do not get along. And so one of our goals here at Clarity is to sort of act as a bridge from these previously siloed entities. Heather, anything you want to add here? Or we?
I think that they purposely don't want to talk to one another. They just have different objectives, right? So when you have a fiscal process and somebody from the IT side says, you need to patch all of your vulnerabilities, they may not be considering that fiscal process has to keep running. You can't take it down like you can on a patch Tuesday or patch Friday, right? So what we really think is important is to be able to talk the same language and to be able to feed each other the information that you need to accomplish your mission and your goals. And so Clarity really focuses on bridging the gap between IT and OT and talking the language on each side of the equation. Thanks, Nick.
Absolutely. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, awesome. So cybersecurity is really a journey. And the first step of that journey is just knowing that you have a problem. So we really do want to ensure with this phase one, it's where about 60% of folks actually live. And it's this idea of recognizing that you have more of an attack vector than you previously thought. And so our goal is to sort of guide you through that initial phase of, oh man, I have this problem that I didn't even realize that I had. And that's where about 60% of organizations live. Phases 2 through 4 are where about 30% of orgs live. And that's sort of like your the beginning of your journey. So if the awareness phase is grabbing your backpack, and we're going to make this a hiking metaphor real quick, so bear with me. Last thing I hiked was a hill in San Francisco where I live, so I'm not super familiar with the states. So if part number 1 is grabbing that backpack, phase number 2 is going to be really where you start climbing the hill. So you understand that you need to have, you can't protect what you can't see. And so you need to have visibility into your entire network, knowing what those previously unknown devices actually were. And then sort of starting to understand, once you have an idea about what assets you have, you need to know what vulnerabilities exist with those assets. Where are your biggest opportunities for risk, for an attack vector to really come in and hit you where it's going to hurt the most? And then you start firefighting. So now that you know what you have, you know what issues you have, you start figuring out how you can prioritize combating those issues so that you're going about improving your implementation in the most strategic and time-efficient way. From there, we have our integration and optimization. So that's where about 10% of orgs live. This is where you take all of your learnings from the first 4 phases of this process, and you start integrating them with the pre-existing tech space that you have. So, okay, we have these assets, we know how to prioritize risk, but what other vendors do I have that I can connect my solution with that are going to really help me have that holistic approach to cybersecurity for the extended Internet of Things? Anything you want to add here, Heather? Yeah, awesome. All right, so we talked about the different interests for someone with an IT background and someone with an OT background, but what do those interests actually look like? Well, the foundation of what we do is asset discovery. As I said previously, you can't protect what you can't see. And so there are a couple of different ways that folks actually go about knowing what they have on their network. Some folks, I'd say about like 80% of our customers are gonna, and I'm trying to keep this as high level as possible, but I think the sort of like the most normal way that folks go about doing this is with passive asset discovery. So what that means is you're just mirroring spam port traffic. And if I'm getting a little too in the weeds, I apologize. But basically you're looking at that network traffic as it's passing through and doing deep analysis on that traffic to understand some really granular details about these assets. We're not just telling you the IP address about them, we're telling you who the manufacturer is, what the serial number is, what the MAC address is, so that when we go to match that asset with our vulnerability databases, we're telling you exactly what problems you have and how you can, and we're making sure that you're not wasting your time with any false positives. Go ahead.
Well, I think what's really important to point out is that this has become pretty critical for us in our government. And so the DHS is one of our agencies that obviously protects all of us in the nation. And they have an organization, which is Critical Infrastructure Security, so CISA. And they have recently pushed down some cyber performance goals. And it's the first time that we've ever seen the government include industrial control systems, OT, IoT as a requirement for organizations, especially in the federal government, to identify what are the assets that we have in those environments. I'll also add the Department of Defense in 2022 in the National Defense Authorization Act made a requirement that every single one of our military bases will have an asset inventory by January of 2024. So I think it just highlights the fact that we as a nation, after the pipeline hack, JBL, some of these very high profile attacks that affect our way of life are now being identified and recognized as critically important to our processes. So it's not just about what Clarity does, it's just having a general awareness of why it's so important to make sure that you take a look at the extended Internet of Things, even in your own environment, because we know adversaries are looking at small business. And we know that they are looking at, what's your Coke machine doing? What about the scale that you're using to mail out your devices? So it's really, really important for everyone to think about it from the perspective of not just that asset discovery for, the large organizations, but we really want to focus too on what you can do to protect yourselves as consumers.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then when we start thinking of this in terms of like boots on the ground, I was previously speaking with someone who has a few manufacturing facilities for their business. And so if we start thinking about the sort of devices that Clarity really provides protection for, your robotic arms, your conveyor belts, if one of those things goes down because it's old and there's a lot of wear and tear there, now it's starting to impact your revenue. And so one of our goals is to help folks understand what they have, so that if they don't have any sort of idea for like a get better plan, or if they need to phase in new assets, we can provide them with information on sort of what their end of life devices are, right? And so you don't have to worry about a 25-year-old robotic arm going down because it's been spinning around on its arm too often, and so it's just there's wear and tear there. And also when it comes to change management, it's pretty easy to say, okay, I need to replace this particular asset. But you don't want to sort of put a Band-Aid on a broken arm. You want to implement habits and practices that are going to prevent you from having the same mistakes again and again. And so with a solution like ours, we provide that sort of living, breathing document that's going to constantly update for you. That way you have access to information rather than having to rely on an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document, or even worse, someone who's been on your engineering floor for 20, 30 years and says they know everything, the age of everything. There's a lot of human error there. So one of the Heather kind of alluded to this previously, but we're starting to see some pretty serious regulations come down from the federal government and some critical infrastructure fields here. So the first two that you see up here, one of these, the pipeline and so this says pipeline owners and operators, that also included rail, so freight and passenger rail. Those regulations came out from TSA last October. Interestingly enough, in March of this year, TSA copied and pasted these 4 rules and just slapped them on to airports and aviation manufacturers as well. And these 4 rules are sort of like 4 guiding principles that folks can leverage to just sort of improve your overall cybersecurity posture when it comes to the extended Internet of Things. That's why I've included them. But it's things like improving your network segmentation policies, ensuring that you have access control in place for your critical systems that goes beyond relying on guards, guns, and badges, and you've elevated into the 21st century and having some sort of IT bifurcation there. Additionally, continuous monitoring. So you want to be able to keep constant tabs on different devices and assets in your network. And then finally, just going about reducing risk through patching systems in a timely and appropriate manner. And then obviously down here, we have the EPAs coming after water. So just a lot of different, or not coming after water, that's a horrible turn of phrase. They are improving the water industry's cybersecurity posture.
It's actually one of the critical infrastructure divisions or verticals that we feel is at the most risk, and especially after the Oldsmar attack, which we had, a operator in the water plant who saw his mouse traveling across the screen and he wasn't controlling it. So, and we also had the attack in California where they're trying to change the chlorine levels. So I think it's really important that, as a community, we also are very aware of the potential threats and supporting our local governments in cybersecurity initiatives. Some of that comes through taxes and funding. There are a lot of grants coming down from the federal government, and so making our smaller agencies, cities, counties aware of the funding that's available is something that we're very focused on. But I think in general, as a community, there's a lot of information out there now about how those things can get funded.
Absolutely. So this is it for what we've got, but now's a great time for Q&A. If anyone has any questions, we're happy to field them.
Still such a variety of IoT devices coming from all over the world. Do you see like a time where there'll be regulations put on the devices themselves as far as security and software development, even like being allowed in the country? Or because then you go on Amazon and buy any light bulb you want from China and you don't know what's in that device.
Yeah, so I would say because of the work I do on the federal and DoD side, the government has recognized that supply chain is something that is paramount to us as a nation, really taking back control of what goes on our networks. And so the government has recently put out what they call SBOM, is the acronym. It's the software bill of materials. So any device that's being utilized by the Department of Defense is going to be required to present what that software bill of materials is. And so if they're buying software from us, if they're buying, servers, printers, when that acquisition goes out, the government will now be requiring you to have a list of all components that make up that device or that software. And so we do see it coming. It's going to take a little bit for it to trickle down. But when you think about defense being, one of the most important things for us as a country, they're already starting to implement these things today. I have an opportunity to be in a prototype with US Army, and they asked us for our SBOM in February. So it's here.
Hi, great presentation. Curious, early on, I think Mackenzie, you were the one that showed that slide from awareness to, yeah, so I'm just kind of curious, there's 60% of people are still at that awareness. What are the things that make people say, I need to start moving to the left? How do they identify that they need to start moving rather than you trying to tell them?
So I'll give like an anecdotal example. So the city of Dallas is currently undergoing a really stressful period of time because they are experiencing a pretty significant, high cost ransomware attack. And so I think from my experiences, one of the sort of driving factors to get people from here to here is honestly a local attack, as sad as it is, but just knowing that there's someone within your community or adjacent to your community who has been a victim of a sort of situation like this, it really does encourage other folks who are either in the same vertical or like just physically nearby to make the same sort of move. I know within the state of Texas, there was a really significant attack 2018, there was a huge attack within the state of Texas where their state agencies were just torn apart by a malicious actor. And so because of that, now the state of Texas has one of the more well-developed practices to sort of respond to cyber incidents. So I guess if there's any silver lining to the fact that it was in Dallas, is that, you know, geographically they have the state agencies to sort of back them up. But I think like just local, like when it hits home is when folks are going to start. I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
So on the commercial side of things, we won't just talk about the public sector. So we secure General Motors, we secure Tesla, we secure Pfizer. We have the top 3 largest healthcare HDOs in the country, right? So it's not just what the government is looking at. It's definitely something that factors in with your cyber insurance policies. We're having that topic come up on the OT side of things, right? So I think the awareness is coming from multiple angles. It's not just the attacks, it's some of the regulation that we saw. But if you think about it in the commercial space, what Mackenzie had stated about the amount of downtime and the cost of these types of attacks is incredible. Some of these organizations, $1 billion a day if their system goes down. So I think that, you know, it's a risk mitigation plan that often comes when cybersecurity starts getting discussed. And so they have to think through that. Now it used to be a IT CISO kind of task. Now it is up to the CEO level. The CEOs are actively participating in what is our exposure, what is our risk for our business.
You know, I'm listening to this and I was just trying to think about something that recently came across in my hometown. I have a friend who is a senior guy at Allstate. And Allstate actually stopped writing policies for Kia. And he laughed because he had to tell his mom that her policy may not be renewed because her class of Kia Hyundai was the one that was being the easiest to be what I'll term cyber stolen, and it's all over the web and all that. So I do know that if he was part of a rapid response team for his company, that they actually called and told whoever the people that if you don't get this fixed within 60 days, you will no longer, Allstate will no longer write policy for any Kia vehicle. Now they've reversed that, and there's a specific class they're ignoring right now, not writing policy. But I just think and I didn't hear that a lot in the news. I heard that cars were being sold, but I didn't hear that, you know, insurance companies weren't writing policies. I just wonder how much of that is out there. It just makes me wonder a lot.
Yeah, I think it's probably more prolific than we actually understand at this point. I've worked with a lot of school districts over the last several years, and a lot of these schools have been denied any cyber insurance because their risk profile is so poor that nobody will insure them. And when you think about it, it's our future. Our kids' identities are being stolen. They're being hacked in a school system, right? And these kids literally have accounts open in their names and they're 5, 6 years old just because of their social security, right? So it is definitely a bigger problem that we all have to start thinking through. And I think that that's why you see so much action coming out of the government right now. But it's definitely something that it's not easily solvable, and it can be very expensive. And so I think that that's the other thing is we see a lot of organizations on this side of the chart because they don't even know where to begin. And so we try to take a very systematic approach of what are the most critical assets if these got taken down? What would it mean from life? What would it mean from, whatever your the value is that you present? What does it mean for your business? And I think that, we take that approach with organizations. It's a journey because it's not a simple problem to solve. And I think that, that's one of the goals that we as Clarity have. And I'll tell you, we do a lot of philanthropy too. So we have a research team that has disclosed over 9,000 critical vulnerabilities since we came about in 2015. And those all go out to the community at no charge. Anybody who has those devices can go out, see what the vulnerability is. And so it's something that's really important for us. We formed a cyber coalition and have a new program called Ethos, where us and our competitors that are in this space are sharing that vulnerability data in a collaborative platform and way so that we, as a community of professionals, can help solve this together. We'll go and be very fierce competitors out there selling to organizations, but we still want to make sure that everyone has access to what that vulnerability looks like and how they can get help.
Just real quick, going back to the question of what pushes people from awareness to visibility, kind of put this in like real life numbers as far as like how expensive ransomware can be. I don't remember the exact numbers, so don't hold this against me, but the city of Atlanta, for example, was hit with a pretty serious cyber attack not too long ago. I think the ransom was asking for like $1 million. And then after they refused to pay it and didn't have any cyber insurance. So after they like gutted their systems and replaced everything, it cost them like north of 15 mil, I think, to get all of their systems back on track. So, it's just, if you're thinking about risk mitigation in terms of cost efficiency and analysis, sometimes it's a better practice to buy the things that are going to protect your environment so you don't get gutted by ransomware. Yeah, you, Mike, we'll get it to you.
So IoT is so diverse. There's so many different devices from smartwatches, Alexa, Nest, etc. And one of the problems with even with supply chain mapping is that it goes down to a serial numbered component. So for example, a circuit board that's made up of components, can you say that this circuit board in F22, that the chip wasn't made in China, for example? So it's so diverse. Is your approach more rather than looking at configuration of diverse equipment, it's more to look at traffic on your network and what type of traffic is coming out of those devices?
So we take a multi-pronged approach. So from a purely protocol perspective, we speak over 500 unique protocols, but those are primarily for manufacturing, right? So as the proliferation of these devices increases and grows more and more, we'll find things on networks that we may not necessarily identify, so we don't know what the vulnerability is. So having that defense in depth and having the ability to not only speak those languages, if there's a device out there we don't know, we still monitor for baseline activity within that network. And so as we see changes, if that device starts communicating out and is pinging China or it's doing something that is not normal, we immediately alert on that. And so good case in point, we have a port authority on the Eastern Seaboard that's one of our customers. We saw baseline activity change on a bridge in that big city. And we alerted them and said, we think something's happening. You need to check it out. And in fact, they were under attack. And it was a critical, critical structure that could have caused a lot of damage. So you have to take that multi-pronged approach. The other thing that I would say is, as an OT specialist in Denver, we don't just depend on our solution. We integrate with over 84 different IT solutions. So we feed Splunk, we feed the firewalls, we can suggest what the firewall does. So it's a very integral approach where, we don't say we're the end all be all from a cybersecurity perspective. You have to have that approach where you're bringing everything together as a defense.
So, in your commercial example, is the risk more, and maybe it's all everything, that the hacker is going to lock up your machine and then you're out of business until you can get it unlocked? Is it that they are getting into your broader system because your system and your machine is connected to your broader system? Or is it more like espionage where they're spying on you through the system and then transmitting information to somebody that you don't want to?
There's three main types of hackers, right? There's those out there who just want to cause you harm for your brand or embarrass you, or you've done something to upset them. Then you have those that are financially motivated, and then you have your nation states. So it's a little bit of all, right? So when it comes to the Department of Defense, the Navy had a supplier who was hacked, and they stole the plans for a submarine. Right. And that was a defense industrial based contractor who produces materials for that submarine and had plans. And so in that case, it's a nation state, right? But we see a lot of ransomware. And it's primarily been on the IT side. And we had Anonymous prove, I think it was like 3 months ago, that now ransomware can be, can control OT systems. So it's all of the above, unfortunately. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. Not a topic that's normal for these presentations, so we really appreciate it.
Yeah, so if any of you have ever tried to pull off an event like we're doing today, you're gonna find there's Easter eggs throughout the day, things that you didn't expect to happen or whatnot. And Mackenzie was an Easter egg, a great Easter egg. I didn't know he was coming up, and so I want to make sure I give Mackenzie his props. Thank you so much, Mackenzie, for coming out. Doing a great job with Heather. We're going to see Heather back here in a minute. We take a second to really think about today. We packed a lot of content into a small amount of time. Starting at 1 o'clock, we started talking about TikTok, which is about your phone, right? What's in your pocket and how you're at risk, what the vulnerabilities are there. We moved from that, into the legal side, right? How does that impact your business? What kind of things you need to be thinking about with regulations and things like that? What are the best lawyers to hire to help you protect your business, right? We then kind of slid over to software as security, SIMS. So Freedom did a great job of walking you through some of the tools that we need to implement to be able to kind of capture all the data that we need to defend our companies. We talked a little bit about communication security, right? The Afghanistan use case is about how we have to secure me talking to you to make sure that nobody in the middle can get into our chili, right? Clarity just came up and talked about IoT. There's nothing scarier than IoT, right? It's awesome, but at the same time, there's just so much to secure. And so, wrapping up what I would call kind of our use case showcase for you today, I have a treat. Gentleman by the name of Michael Blake. He's the chief architect for Owl Cyber Defense, a great partner of ours. This company builds awesome cyber secure network devices, solutions, software solutions. So, I brought all these different things together for you today And I'm now getting into the kind of the ground floor of all things, which is network security. And how do we prevent people from getting into our networks? And so Michael's gonna take us through, he's a lifelong learner. He's a scientist.